Phantom of the Opera is undoubtedly one of my favorite film franchises. And it just so happens that the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical adaptation is one of my favorite films of all time. Now, I will dive a little bit deeper into what my relationship actually is with that film and kind of how it all manifested itself when we crossed that bridge. But the reason it is relevant to the here and now is because it is also, or was, my first introduction to the Phantom of the Opera series as a whole. So I'm fully expecting it to be really my truest point of reference, as I draw comparisons, discuss differences, things of that nature as we progress through the different adaptations that we have from over the years. But if we're going to discuss Phantom of the Opera, we have to begin with the 1925 silent film starring the legendary Lon Chaney. Now, narratively, compared to the Andrew Lloyd Webber version, it hits a lot of the same story beats, right? The basic gist of the plot doesn't change much at all. I think the biggest distinction between the two is in the way that the relationships between the characters are structured, the interactions between the characters are structured, and kind of how each of the films chooses to have us arrive at the similar story points, and in the way that all of these elements kind of affect or change the film in terms of tone. Obviously, when we look at the musical, that is going very much more for a dramatic or romantic tone. Now, I'm not going to waste a whole bunch of time breaking down every single facet of both films to illustrate my point. If you are very familiar with Phantom at all, you're going to understand exactly what I'm trying to say. If you're not, I highly encourage you to explore these films for yourself. What I will say is that I think the easiest way to kind of just come out and say it is that Andrew Lloyd Webber's is to the broader Phantom series as, say, Bram Stoker's Dracula or Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Those films are to their respective franchises. And one of the key ways that they enforce this is in the Phantom himself. Now, comparatively, they're still very much the same. There's still people that have grown to hate the world that has misunderstood or hated them. But I think the key to Andrew Lloyd Webber's Phantom is that a lot of those feelings come from self-loathing in a way, low self-esteem, kind of this assumption of how the world and everybody in it views him because of the way that he looks, right? And I know that comes down to the setting mostly, the point in time in which the story is told, and kind of the how the subject of disabilities and deformities are grossly misunderstood and kind of viewed in a very cruel, horrid manner. But when you look at his deformity, it's not really that bad in the broader scheme of things. You know, there's an obvious distinction between this side of his face and that side of his face, yes, but it just looks like he's been badly burned, or maybe he's got a slight skin condition. You know, but like I said, ultimately it's just not that bad to me. It's still very much just Gerard Butler. Especially when you compare it to Lon Chaney's Phantom, who, you know, to state it plainly, is absolutely hideous looking. He is 100% ghoulish in appearance. And it's very obvious that they are going for much more of a horror-centered tone with this film. And it does everything it can to really drive home the fact and make you as the viewer believe or buy into the idea that he is this villain, this murderous madman. Christine Daae is absolutely the victim, damsel in distress. Raoul is the hero that comes in to save the day and kind of sweep said damsel off her feet. You know, other than that, honestly, I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to critique a silent film. I think, you know, each of the cast in their own right are extremely successful with the characters that they play. No complaints as far as that goes. I think everybody does a great job. I enjoyed watching this movie. I think my favorite part comes from the masquerade ball. Because this is the period where unbeknownst to me, this otherwise black and white film just gets a splash of color from out of nowhere. And the reason it does this is because this is the period where the Phantom shows up in his costume that he calls the Red Death. Now, sure, they could have just let it be what it was and let the dialogue card call him, refer to him as the Red Death and let that be that. But it was a very cool, creative decision to really try to emphasize the fact that he is very red. They draw attention to the fact that, you know, while everybody is dressed in pretty neutral colors, he stands out as this skull that looks like a musketeer, I guess, for lack of a better term. But he is very red, and it was just very cool to me. He stuck out. And so that's just whenever I think about this film, that's the particular scene that I always think of, because it was very cool that they made that simple alteration. I don't know how difficult it was to add color to things back then in the 20s. I imagine it might have been a big to-do. Certainly by today's standards, it doesn't really seem like it would be that big of a deal. But when you're watching this movie for, say, the first, 45 minutes to an hour, be black and white, and, you get in the general rhythm of the film, and then all of a sudden you hit this scene where it's just in color for no reason, and then there's just the Phantom decked out in red. I just thought it was really cool. Something that I felt a little bit mixed on is the mask that the Phantom wears whenever he is in disguise or shielded from the public. To me, it kind of gave the sense of being like very very porcelain or maybe glass. I think the closest thing that I can compare it to just visually is the mask that the Grinch wears when he goes to Whoville, the live action one, if you remember. It just kind of has that kind of cartoony vibe, not necessarily that bad. But yeah, there's just this very cartoony kind of porcelain or glass kind of feeling to it. Ultimately, I can forgive it because, whereas other adaptations like the musical are only focused on covering up this much of his face, there's a lot more to Lon Chaney to cover up. Because he is, in his entirety, this hideously deformed monster. So I can kind of forgive the fact that, you've got to come up with something that kind of hides his entire face being the disfigurement. I think the biggest negative that I have to the film is a relatively small one, but it is something that I noticed. That being the music. Now, the music as a whole is absolutely phenomenal. I think it's a blast to listen to. But I just found that in places, it doesn't necessarily match up with what I think is happening or the tone that it's trying to bring across. There's a couple different instances where, I think they're going for a lot more suspenseful or tense tone, where it's dark and foreboding and things like that, and the music is kind of happy, or vice versa. It's supposed to be something that is kind of upbeat and lively, and it's just kind of dreadful and dreary and kind of weird. I will say that this being my second time watching this, I didn't really notice it as much as I did the first time. My second watch, it kind of seemed like things matched up a little better than I remembered. But, there's definitely still brief periods where things don't match up, and it just kind of takes me out of it a little bit. Doesn't ruin it for me by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just kind of takes you out of the immersion of the story and the tone and everything that's happening. It's like, well, it's just kind of abrasive, I guess, in a way, but ultimately, overall, I mean, there's a reason why this is my favorite franchise. There's a reason why this movie is a classic. I love it. And I'm very much looking forward to moving on into other adaptations that I haven't necessarily seen before. So I hope you guys are likewise looking forward to that. And we'll see you in the next review.